This is the story of a man named Dennis Rader. To the world, he seemed like a completely normal man. He led a quiet life, had a family, worked as a compliance officer in a small town in Kansas, and he even volunteered at his local church. But behind that calm smile and clean-cut appearance, he was hiding a terrible secret. It all started with a family. Joseph Otero, his wife Julie, and their 2 children found themselves dead in their Wichita home on January 15th, 1974. They had been tied up, tortured, and killed in a very violent and controlled way. It wasn't a random crime or an amateur robbery. This was something much worse, and it wasn't the end. In fact, it was just the beginning. Soon after, another woman, Nancy Fox, was found dead, also tied up and strangled. Then came Maureen Hedge. Same method, same terrifying control. It became clear this wasn't just about killing. It felt like the killer was sending a message. The cops didn't know who they were dealing with. Not yet, but eventually, they would come to know him by a terrifying name: BTK. It's the mid-1970s. Small-town America. Everything looks peaceful. Lawns are neatly mowed, neighbors wave to each other, and life seems normal. But behind that calm neighborhood vibe, something much darker was unfolding. The cops were working day and night, desperate to catch whoever was behind the killings. Detectives stayed late, chased every lead, questioned countless suspects, and knocked on every door they could, hoping one of them would finally reveal the truth. But no matter how hard they tried, the killer stayed one step ahead. And just when something seemed within reach, the case would slip through their fingers. Then something changed. Out of nowhere, letters started appearing. They weren't anonymous tips or random notes. They were detailed, disturbing, and deeply personal. They showed up in newspapers, on TV, and even in the hands of investigators. Each one was signed by someone calling himself BTK. At first, it seemed like a messed-up joke, maybe just a delusional attention seeker trying to spread fear. But that assumption didn't last long, because the details in those letters began matching actual murders. The way the victims were bound, the method of killing, even their identities, all of it matched what had really happened. That's when the truth hit hard. This wasn't someone pretending to be a killer. It was the killer confessing, in his own words, and in his mind, he was always one move ahead. He wanted them to know he was watching. He wanted them to feel helpless. He wanted fear to do what physical control couldn't, keep the city paralyzed. And the worst part, it worked. People started locking their doors during the day. They looked over their shoulders in grocery stores. Wichita wasn't just a city anymore. It became a haunted zone. Nobody knew who BTK was. He could have been your neighbor, your coworker, the man standing behind you in church. That fear, that unknown, was his real weapon. Here's where the story gets really strange. After committing a series of murders in the late 1970s and early 1980s, BTK suddenly vanished. No more bodies, no more letters, nothing. In some ways, the silence was more terrifying than the murders. People started asking questions. Did he die? Did he leave town? Or was he still around, just watching? Over the years, the cops never gave up completely. They kept the case open, followed up on tips, and looked into new leads whenever they came up. But nothing ever turned into solid evidence. Time went on, leads dried up, and the case, it turned ice cold. Some people even thought BTK was gone for good, that they'd never hear from him again. And just when the world had nearly forgotten him, in 2004, he reappeared out of nowhere. He started sending letters again, packages too. Sometimes he even called. He joked about pop culture, dropped references to current events, and spoke like nothing had changed, like he hadn't disappeared at all. And this time, he made a mistake, just a small digital mistake, but it was enough to finally break the case wide open. And suddenly, it felt like the past had come alive again. The headlines, the fear, the haunting name, BTK. It was all back, and this time, there would be no disappearing. You're probably wondering, how do cops finally catch a serial killer who's been hiding in plain sight for over 30 years? It all started with something most people wouldn't even think about: a floppy disk. That's right, one of those old square computer disks that seem like ancient history now. Inside that disk were hidden details called metadata, basically digital fingerprints that showed where the files had been created or edited. And guess what? One of the files had been worked on at a church in Wichita, and the name attached to the computer? Dennis. Suddenly, after all those years of silence and dead ends, they had a real lead. The cops started digging deeper. They pulled library records, checked computer activity, and began connecting the dots. Then came the big break: DNA. Not directly from Dennis Rader himself, but from his daughter's medical records. Investigators found a DNA match that was close enough to confirm their suspicions. Everything started to make sense. For the first time in over 3 decades, law enforcement had an actual suspect. They finally knew who BTK really was. But even with a name, the cops had to be careful. They couldn't blow it. They set up surveillance, followed Rader's movements, and waited for the perfect moment. They learned his patterns. What time did he leave home? Where he drove? What church events he attended? This wasn't just an arrest. It was the final move in a decades-long chess match. February 25th, 2005, Wichita, Kansas, Park City, a quiet street, a plain house, nothing unusual. Except the cops had been parked nearby for days, waiting for the right moment. Inside was a quiet, ordinary-seeming man named Dennis Rader. To everyone who knew him, he was just another neighbor. He helped out at church and volunteered with the Cub Scouts, the kind of person you'd never suspect. But when the officers knocked on his door, he didn't try to escape. He didn't try to deny anything. He just said 3 simple words: "You got me." And just like that, after years of fear, mystery, and no answers, the BTK killer was finally caught. The man who had once bragged about being untouchable, about outsmarting the cops, was now in handcuffs. No disguise, no tricks, just a scared, aging man who'd run out of time. News spread like wildfire. People couldn't believe it. BTK was Dennis, that quiet guy from the neighborhood, the scout leader? It was a terrifying realization. Evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like the man in your next door. What came next was one of the most disturbing confessions ever recorded in a criminal case. Rader didn't try to hide anything. He told detectives everything, exactly how he killed each victim, how he picked them, followed them, tied them up, and hurt them. He even admitted to going back to some houses after the killings to move the bodies or take personal items as trophies. And through it all, he showed no regret. He didn't feel guilty. Instead, he felt proud. When investigators asked him why he did it, his answer was clear: control, power, sexual pleasure. He told them he believed he was smarter than the cops, that he'd never get caught. And for 31 years, he was right. But eventually, technology moved forward, and Rader made a mistake. He didn't think law enforcement would keep searching for so long, and that's what finally brought him down. In his confession, he described every murder with haunting detail. He spoke like it was a job, not a horror show. No emotion, just details. He even drew diagrams, step-by-step recreations of the murders. It felt like he wasn't just confessing, he was reliving it, trying to hold on to the power. August 2005. After decades of silence and fear, Dennis Rader stood before the world and pleaded guilty to 10 murders. The true weight of his horror finally spoken out loud. He chose to skip the trial. In exchange for a plea deal, he accepted 10 life sentences, stacked back to back, with no chance of ever walking free again. The courtroom was full on that day. Family members of his victims were there. Some cried, some shouted. All of them wanted justice. And finally, they got it. Or at least, they thought they did. because even after he was locked up, Rader still had people who followed him, fans who wrote him letters, others who tried to excuse what he did, and some who even made his story sound romantic. It was strange and deeply disturbing. But something else happened too, something unexpected and powerful. Family members of victims and people affected by his crimes began speaking out more than ever before. They shared what they'd carried for years, the pain, the grief, the silent fight to heal. They turned their loss into awareness. One mother started a support group for families of murder victims. A brother gave talks at schools. A daughter helped pass new laws on stalking and victim protection. In a twisted way, their strength began to undo what Rader tried to build: fear, silence, and darkness. By doing this, they made sure the story of BTK wouldn't just be about the lives he destroyed, but also about the strength, courage, and resilience of the people left behind. But the way people responded to his crimes helped others find healing, speak up about trauma, and support one another. That's how the victims are remembered. Not just by how they died, but by how their lives continued to make a difference. If this story haunted you like it did me, hit that like button and tell me in the comments, what moment in the BTK case truly disturbed you the most? And if you're into real-life horror stories, killers who hide in plain sight, crimes that go unsolved for years, make sure to subscribe. Because next time, we're diving into a case even more twisted. Until then, stay curious, stay skeptical, and never stop asking questions.